Airlines carried over 5 billion passengers last year. Cruise ships carried around 35 million. The airline industry generates more than $1 trillion in annual revenue. The cruise industry generates a fraction of that. And yet, when you strip away the raw scale and look at what actually sticks, what percent of each dollar collected survives as profit? Cruise lines beat airlines so decisively it barely qualifies as a competition. The global airline industry earns roughly $7.90 in net profit per passenger. Royal Caribbean in 2024 made approximately $336 per passenger. Same category, travel. Vastly different financial outcomes. The obvious explanation is that cruises charge more, and they do, but that is not the reason. The real reason is something more structural, more deliberate, and significantly stranger than price alone. Because an airline and a cruise line are not actually selling the same thing, they look like they are. They both sell you a ticket. They both promise you a destination. But the moment you understand what is actually being sold, the profit gap stops looking like a quirk and starts looking completely inevitable. Here is the key distinction. An airline sells you transportation. The product is the flight. You pay, you travel, you arrive. The transaction is complete. A cruise line sells you something different. It sells you entry into a self-contained floating economy that the company owns entirely, operates exclusively, and runs without a single competitor for the duration of your stay. The ticket is not the product. The ticket is the door. Everything profitable happens after you walk through it. To understand why that matters, you have to first understand why airlines are so structurally bad at making money. Because the contrast is what makes the cruise model so striking. Airlines have a cost problem that is almost unfixable. Fuel alone accounts for roughly 20% of operating expenses, and fuel prices are determined by global oil markets that no airline can influence. When crude prices spike, margins collapse. When they stabilize, margins recover slightly. The airline industry has spent decades trying to hedge against this and has never fully solved it. Labor is now the largest single cost, around 28% and still rising. And unlike cruise lines, major carriers employ workers under domestic labor law with unions, minimum wage requirements, and regulatory oversight baked into every contract. But the deeper problem is not costs. The deeper problem is competition. When the US deregulated the airline industry in the late 1970s, it created one of the most brutally transparent consumer markets in the world. Today, you can compare ticket prices across a dozen carriers in under 30 seconds. Low-cost carriers permanently disrupted full-service airlines by stripping the product down to the seat itself. Full-service airlines were forced to respond with matching prices on competitive routes. Pricing power, the ability to charge more than the underlying market will bear, largely evaporated. Airlines tried to fix this with loyalty programs, frequent flyer miles, status tiers, co-branded credit cards, an entire secondary economy built to manufacture stickiness in a product that is inherently transactional. It helped at the margins, but it also became another arms race because every major carrier built the same program and passengers learned to play multiple loyalty systems simultaneously. What was supposed to lock customers in became another dimension of comparison shopping. The upsell attempts are real. Bag fees, seat selection charges, early boarding, premium economy, Wi-Fi. These generate billions in aggregate, but passengers know the game, resent it, and comparison shop those extras too. When one carrier charges for carry-ons, others have to decide whether to match or absorb the competitive pressure. Each new fee becomes an industry standard within a few years, and the advantage disappears almost immediately. And then there is the time constraint. A domestic flight averages around 2.5 hours. The revenue window is the flight itself. The moment the plane lands, the commercial relationship ends. The passenger walks out of the terminal and immediately begins comparing alternatives for the next trip. Aircraft spend enormous amounts of time on the ground, boarding, fueling, turnarounds, maintenance, producing nothing while fixed costs keep running. The unit of production for an airline is a seat mile, and once the seat mile is consumed, it is gone. The airline's structural trap is this. It built a brilliant transportation network and then sold that network into a commodity market where every advantage it created, more routes, faster aircraft, better coverage, simultaneously trained customers to expect lower prices. Speed and reach became not a justification for premium pricing, but a floor for the minimum acceptable offer. The better airlines got at their core product, the less they could charge for it. Cruise lines made a completely different decision. Start with how ships fill. A cruise ship is an extreme fixed cost machine. Whether it carries 1,000 passengers or 5,000, the fuel burns, the crew gets paid, the debt gets serviced. That fixed base does not flex. So the first operational priority for any cruise line is not profit per ticket. It is occupancy. Fill the ship. Fill it completely. Fill it beyond the nominal cabin count, because ships can legally sail at over 100% capacity when multiple passengers share a cabin, and the major lines regularly push to 105, even 110%. They will discount a ticket aggressively to get there. A researcher who spent years studying the industry put it plainly: a cruise line can almost give a cabin away for free and still make a profit. That is not a figure of speech. It is a description of the actual cost architecture. The ticket price is calibrated to produce a full ship, not to produce margin. The margin comes from everything else, because once the door is closed and the ship leaves port, the economics change entirely. At sea, the cruise line is not one option among many. It is the only option. There is no competing bar, no other restaurant, no alternative casino, no way to open a different app and find a better deal on the drink you're about to order. The competitive market that destroyed airline pricing power simply does not exist 300 miles from the nearest port. Competition ends when the gangway lifts. Cruise cards and wristbands replaced cash years ago. You tap to buy, tap to drink, tap to gamble. The psychological friction of spending, the pause that comes from handing over physical money, is gone. Spending becomes seamless. That is not a convenience feature. That is choice architecture applied to a captive consumer base, and it was designed to work exactly as it does. The revenue layers stack deliberately. Drink packages are the first major layer, sold before the ship leaves, often on embarkation day itself, when staff are positioned at welcome desks specifically for this purpose. They are framed as a deal. Pay one upfront price, drink freely for 7 days. Passengers who buy them tend to drink more than they otherwise would, and the per-drink margin on alcohol is already high. But the more important mechanism is psychological. Once a passenger has prepaid for drinks, ordering no longer feels like spending. The internal cost calculation disappears. Every cocktail feels free because it is already settled. That shift in perception is not a side effect of the pricing model. It is the reason the pricing model exists. Every other department operates on a similar logic. Spa staff run promotions on embarkation day because the first day sets the spending tone for the entire voyage. If you book a treatment on day 1, you are statistically more likely to return. Specialty restaurants push early reservations because a passenger who is committed to a dining experience in advance arrives already primed to spend more within it. The retail shops are positioned along the natural foot traffic corridors between the atrium and the pool decks, capturing impulse purchases from passengers who had no intention of buying anything. Even the art auctions, one of the stranger revenue streams on a modern ship, are run as free entertainment events where attendance is welcome, and social dynamics gradually nudge watching into bidding. The casino is the second largest onboard revenue department, and it operates on a schedule that most passengers never notice. Casinos on cruise ships are required to close while the ship is in port. They open the moment the vessel clears into international waters. That rhythm is not a regulatory inconvenience. It is a commercial calendar, engineered into every itinerary. Sea days, the days when the ship is simply sailing between ports, when there is no excursion to compete for attention and no destination to explore, are peak revenue days across every department simultaneously. The casino fills, the spa is booked, the specialty restaurants are at capacity, the shops are busy. Every revenue stream runs at full intensity at exactly the same time, because there is nowhere else to be and nothing else to spend on. Shore excursions deserve their own mention because the economics are not visible from the passenger's side. When a cruise ship docks, the line offers organized tours, snorkeling, historical sites, city walks, beach packages. Passengers book through the cruise line at cruise line prices. What most passengers do not know is that the cruise line retains up to 70% of that revenue before it reaches the local operators who actually run the tours. The ship is not just bringing tourists to a destination, it is monetizing the destination visit itself, extracting the majority of tourism spend before it ever reaches local hands. Port fees paid by cruise lines to host cities tend to run between $4 and $15 per passenger, a number that frequently falls short of what those cities spend maintaining the infrastructure to receive the ships in the first place. Some cruise lines have taken this logic to its endpoint. Royal Caribbean developed its own private island. Destination in the Bahamas. The ship docks, passengers disembark. They buy food, drinks, experiences, and water park access on what feels like a shore excursion. Every dollar spent there belongs to the same company that sold the cruise. The captive economy extends off the ship and onto the beach. Underneath all of this sits a cost structure that no airline can legally replicate. Carnival Corporation, Royal Caribbean Group, and Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings all maintain headquarters in Miami. They are American companies in every cultural and operational sense. Their customers are predominantly American. Their marketing is red, white, and blue. Their executives appear before Congress, but they are not legally American corporations. Carnival is incorporated in Panama, Royal Caribbean in Liberia, Norwegian in Bermuda. Their ships are registered under flags of convenience: Bahamian, Liberian, Panamanian, which exempt them from U.S. corporate income tax, U.S. labor law, and U.S. minimum wage requirements. The practical effect on the cost structure is significant. A domestically registered American company pays federal corporate tax. A cruise line does not, or pays at rates a fraction of what an equivalent land-based competitor faces. Debt taken on to build a new ship and a modern megaship cost between $800 million and $2 billion can be depreciated against income, further compressing the taxable base. The crew working those ships is sourced from the Philippines, Indonesia, Eastern Europe, and anywhere else where maritime labor is available at lower wages. They work under maritime contract, not domestic employment law. An airline operating in the United States cannot pay its cabin crew $2 an hour. A cruise line operating the same route can, because it legally operates under an entirely different framework. This is not an oversight in the regulatory system. It is the foundational legal architecture of the entire industry, built deliberately over decades, defended actively in lobbying, and unchanged in its essential structure to this day. The combined effect of all these layers, the captive economy, the stacked onboard revenue, the engineered spending psychology, the favorable legal structure, produces margins that the airline industry cannot approach. Royal Caribbean's net profit margin reached over 23% in late 2025. The global airline average that year sat below 4%. A single sailing of Symphony of the Seas at full capacity for 7 days generates approximately $9.8 million in revenue and around $1.7 million in profit. That is $239,000 in profit per day from one ship, while Royal Caribbean operates dozens more doing the same. The airline charges you $7.90 and moves you across a continent in 5 hours. The cruise ship charges you $336 and travels in a loose arc for a week. The math only looks strange until you understand what each company is actually selling. The cruise industry solved the fundamental problem that destroys airline margins: competition at the point of sale. By eliminating competition after the point of sale, they did not win by being cheaper or faster. They won by building a wall around the customer after the fare was collected, and then operating a complete economy behind that wall for the duration of the relationship. Airlines spend billions competing for passengers in an open market where every advantage erodes within years. Cruise lines spend just enough to get a passenger through the door and then operate in a market of one for the next 7 days. Most industries fight for margin in the transaction. The cruise industry understood that the transaction is almost beside the point. The cheap fare you found online was not the deal, it was the invitation. The business started the moment you stepped aboard, and it did not stop until you disembarked, lighter in pocket, already scrolling for next year's sailing. The airline sells you a seat and moves you along. The cruise line builds a city, sails it past a few islands, and invites you inside. One of those is a transportation company. The other is something considerably more deliberate than it appears.